It's that time again, a little later than scheduled, as the Premier League returns to our screens and managers and players prepare for a 38-game slog to determine where each team will finish. And with it, countless more amateur managers and FPL players are also getting ready for a fiercely competitive season of FPL action, in which they have to prepare for all 380 Premier League games. That's right, numerically speaking at least, it is far tougher to be a fancy Premier League manager than it is to be an actual Premier League manager, and I'm sure many of our subscribers like to play the game and will be mulling over their final drafts now ahead of the start of the season. Some of you may recall that I made a big FPL video right before the start of last season, which hardly anyone watched. Naturally then, I've decided to do the same again this season, since a fair few people have asked for it, and because here at HITC Sevens, we run our own not-so-mini league, and this always seems like the best place to share the code to enter. If you were in the HITC Sevens mini league last season, and you're using the same account this season, you don't need to do anything, you will auto rejoin the league when you register your team for this season. If you weren't part of the league last season and wish to join, the league code is WHP5UU, which you can see on screen now, and I will try to remember to put it in the video description as well, in case it is easier for you to just copy and paste it to avoid any typos. If you ever need any further indication of how amateurish this channel is, and I'm not sure why you would, I don't actually know who won the league last season, since when I logged in, it had already updated for the new season and, as far as I can tell, there's no way of going back and viewing historic league tables. If any of you know a way to do that, or if I'm just being an idiot again, let me know and I'll take a look. There isn't a prize for winning the league or anything, I'm not Ellen, but I do normally give a few shoutouts throughout the season, and a big one at the end, although obviously I've ruined that this season. In my defence, it was a strange season all round, and it seemed to end very abruptly on FPL as they obviously had to make various time adjustments and had a shorter period of time to adjust for next season. One thing I want to point out in light of some of the comments that I got last year, it seems as though some people aren't aware of FPL at all. So very quickly, FPL is the most popular fantasy football game concerning the Premier League. It is free to play, and you can register from anywhere in the world, and then you can create leagues to compete with your friends, colleagues, or favourite YouTube communities. That's HITC Sevens. In today's video, I'm just going to do a little FPL season preview, sharing my views on some do's and don'ts, broken up into 4 categories: the must-haves, the maybes, bargains and wildcards, which is sort of 2 categories combined, and then those to avoid. There is of course no reason in which you should listen to me. I'm a decent but by no means spectacular FPL player, I've never cracked the world's top 100,000 players, and whoever did win the HITC Sevens FPL mini league last season, it wasn't me. I also have a tendency, like many of you I'm sure, to increasingly miss deadlines and forget about it as the season goes on, but I'm going to try and be a little more attentive this season. Anyhow, for what it's worth, here are some of my 2020-21 FPL tips, starting with who I consider to be the must-haves. I should start with Harry Kane because the England captain only has 16% ownership. I suspect that's because Kane is expensive, he's the most expensive forward in the game at £10.5 million, and also because he hasn't scored 20 plus goals in the Premier League in each of the last 2 seasons. I still think 16% ownership is absurd though, and I'd urge you all to look at the bigger picture. When fit, I don't think anyone provides more guaranteed goals, and subsequently points, than Harry Kane. The man is a bona fide goal machine. He's guaranteed to start virtually every game for Spurs, who essentially don't have a backup centre forward, and Tottenham have some high point potential fixtures early on. In an injury-free season, I think Harry Kane hits 25 Premier League goals at a minimum, and I can't believe more people have picked Jamie Vardy, who is only £0.5 million cheaper, as much as I like the Leicester City man. Kane was the first name on my team sheet in my first draft. One of the problems with picking your FPL team this season is the early fixture disruption, with the 2 Manchester clubs particularly not featuring in game week 1. Everyone will have their own theories as to how they should navigate that particular quandary, but ultimately, long term, it won't surprise you that I consider Kevin De Bruyne to be a must-have. He is Manchester City's most rotation-proof attacking asset, he is by far the most creative player in the Premier League, and the beguiling Belgian behemoth should lead to a points bonanza yet again. De Bruyne was the highest scoring player on FPL last season with 251 points, he's the joint 4th most expensive player in the game this season, and he's the 2nd most selected midfielder. I don't know how you navigate game week 1, but I'd make sure you have him by game week 2. I was cautious about including too many must-haves, so I've limited this section to 4 players, and since the top assets are so expensive, if you actually followed my lead, it wouldn't give you a great deal of flexibility over the rest of your squad. But as I said, this is all just my opinion, and you are well advised to disregard it at will. Given Liverpool's brilliance though, I think it's difficult to make a case against having either Sadio Mane or Mohamed Salah. Liverpool's sharp-eyed wide men are both priced at £12 million this season, making them the joint most expensive players on the game. And with that in mind, personally, I would side with Salah, who I believe has outscored Mane every season on the game since arriving in the Premier League. Clearly, the rest of the FPL community agree with me, since Salah is selected by 30.2% of players at the time of recording, compared to just 12.5% for Mane. Lastly, in the must-haves category, I think you simply have to find the funds for Trent Alexander-Arnold in your defence, because all your mates will have him and will almost certainly hit double figures for assists yet again. He's expensive at £7.5 million, and it's possible to save £0.5 million by going for his opposite fullback Andy Robertson, but I think that would be a mistake. Alexander-Arnold is the only player on the game with over 50% ownership, so if you don't pick him, be prepared to kick yourself when he gets a hat-trick of assists against Leeds on the opening day. The only counter-argument, and it's a weak one, is that Nico Williams looks to be a great little right-back, and his emergence means Klopp could give Trent more rotation than last season, but I can't see it being too much of a factor myself. Moving on to the maybes, and I'll have to try to be more terse here, the first name that interests me is Timo Werner. Evidently, I'm not the only one, since with 46.5% ownership, only Alexander-Arnold is more favoured by FPL managers than the prolific German marksman. Clearly, FPL players find Werner's £9.5 million price point attractive, and I can understand why. As I said in yesterday's deep dive into Chelsea's finances and preparation for next season, I think Werner is very well equipped for life in the Premier League, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if he was one of the division's top scorers this season. On the flip side, I'm always reluctant to pick a new signing for Game Week 1 on FPL, and there are none in my current team. How often do we see even very talented players just take a little bit of time to adjust to England's top flight, and personally I'd rather miss out on a few points and bring Werner in whilst he's still cheap early on than bank on him from the off and get bitten. In fact, it's a similar story with almost all of the top 6's arrivals, whether it be Hakim Ziyech, Kai Havertz or Donny van der Beek. Next up, if Manchester United are awarded 8,342 penalties again this season, Bruno Fernandez is going to be hard to overlook. No doubt that's why he is priced at £10.5 million and why, despite not coming cheap, he's still Manchester United's most popular asset with over 23% ownership. He's a bit pricey for me, and I think you could get stung if the Red Devils don't get as many penalties this season as last. For a well-balanced team, you can probably only afford 3 premium assets, which I would class as those over £10 million, and personally, I think there are safer options out there than Fernandez. One of those options is Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, who is tied with Sadio Mane and Mohamed Salah as the 3 most expensive players in the game at £12 million. In the interest of full disclosure, I'm actually a massive hypocrite because in my first draft, which I made in a bit of a rush, I've picked Aubameyang, who I'm listing as a maybe, and not Salah or Mane, who I categorised as must-haves, so I'm hardly practising what I preach. That's partly because I like Arsenal's early fixtures though, and without the Manchester clubs featuring, I think Aubameyang has early captaincy potential. It's also worth noting that I did make a team in a rush so I could reactivate the league and get a code to share with you all in this video, and if I can find the time I will most likely change it, although finding space for Kane, Aubameyang and Salah may prove to be challenging. Anyway, Aubameyang is obviously expensive, but for good reason, and he's the most selected midfielder on the game with over 40% ownership. Staying in the elite and very expensive bracket, you cannot ignore Raheem Sterling and Sergio Aguero, both of whom can fall victim to Pep's rotation roulette, but both of whom are almost guaranteed points when they start games. I don't have either because I don't want the Man City team selection to give me a brain aneurysm, but if you can get them right in terms of selection time and captaincy, it will pay dividends. Back to Chelsea assets, if Christian Pulisic can start this season as he finished last, he will be a bargain, but the combination of fitness concerns and used signings mean I'll be holding off on him even at £8 million, and over 95% of FPL players seem to feel the same way, based upon his ownership statistics. For the same price, £8 million, I think Nicolas Pepe is an intriguing option. He showed promise as last season progressed, and as I said with regards to Aubameyang, Arsenal have some attractive early fixtures. I couldn't afford any midfielders in that £7 to £9 million bracket, but I'll be keeping an eye on Pepe if I choose to utilise my wildcard early on. Another issue FPL managers should keep an eye on is Manchester City's post-David Silva midfield, which one would expect to result in increased game time for both Phil Foden and Bernardo Silva. Foden at £6.5 million and Bernardo at £7.5 million will look like bargains if either of them can nail down a starting berth, as would Ferran Torres, £7 million, or Riyad Mahrez, £8.5 million if they could. But we all know about Pep's rotation and extreme selfishness surrounding the hopes and dreams of FPL managers. I'd hold off on all four until we see how Man City shape up in the first few weeks and who is firing on all cylinders. If Danny Ings replicates anything like his goal-scoring form of last season, he would still represent value for money even with an increased price tag of £8.5 million, hence his 25% ownership. Luca Digne will look like a snip at £6 million if Carlo Ancelotti can shore up Everton's back line, given his points potential going forward, and the same goes for Benjamin Mendy at Manchester City if he can stay fit, and Sergio Reguilon if he were to sign for Manchester United, although we're straying into areas of speculation at this stage. Benjamin Mendy's assist potential is extraordinary when he avoids injury. It's just a shame he has never gone long without a setback since arriving at the Etihad. Reguilon is an excellent fullback who loves to bomb forward. I'd expect him to be priced at £6 million if he joined Manchester United, but if he were £5.5 million like Wan-Bissaka, I'd have to find space for him. Lastly, in terms of the maybes, there's always a gem that comes up from the Championship, and there are three in particular that interest me: Jared Bowen, Eberechi Eze, and Matthias Pereira. All three were superb in England's second tier, and all three offer points potential in terms of both goals and assists. Bowen is the most expensive, but also the safest, having already impressed during his first 6 months at West Ham. Eze is raw, but remarkably talented, and is the type of player who could really cause a storm in this division, and Matthias Pereira must have made almost 20 assists at West Brom last season. His vision and awareness are superb, and that's exactly what FPL managers like to hear. Of course, all three play for teams who are likely to finish the season in the bottom half, and are unlikely to be scoring goals for fun every week, but all priced between £6 and £6.5 million, they could represent real value and be great differentials if they can hit the ground running. This video is going to be nightmarishly long if I don't speed things up, so my bargains and wildcards include Emi Martinez, who is only £4.5 million, but may well be Arsenal's number one, and if or when he is dropped, Bernd Leno then represents good value of £5 million. Elsewhere, I think Matt Ryan's decent value at £4.5 million since he's a good keeper, and Brighton's impressive defence credentials mean that there is real clean sheet potential, at least against those from outside of the top six. I like Kieran Tierney and suspect he'd be £6 million were it not for injury last season, making him cheap in my book at £5.5 million. Mason Greenwood has been moved to midfield and is just £7.5 million, meaning every man, woman and child will have him in their team if he becomes a regular fixture in Manchester United's dynamic front three. It's a similar story with Bukayo Saka, who is very cheap at £5.5 million, provided he actually plays. The 19-year-old has already exhibited his ability to create goals, and whilst he's unlikely to play every game, he could be an interesting differential if you could afford a £5.5 million substitute. My last three bargains are Helder Costa at Leeds United, Alan St-Maximin at Newcastle United, and Grady Diangana at West Brom. All three players are just £5.5 million, which is the same as Brighton's permanently injured wide man Jose Izquierdo. Whilst Costa was a bit subdued at times last season, he grew as the campaign went on. Leeds will be reliant on wide players and midfielders to score goals, and I think he can make the step up. St-Maximin is arguably already Newcastle's best player, he just didn't get a hatful of goals or assists last season. If he has added a dose of final product to his game over the break, he'll be one of the biggest bargains on the game. And most of you will have seen the uproar among many West Ham fans, and players indeed, following the sale of Grady Diangana, who is likely to be a regular for West Brom and has a bit of magic in his boots. If you've £5.5 million in the bank, I think you could do a lot worse than taking a chance on one of those three. Now to those to avoid, in my humble opinion, starting with Dean Henderson and David De Gea. Unless you know one of them is going to start every game in the Premier League, in which case presumably your name is Ollie, I'd stay away. I'd avoid Gylfi Sigurdsson at £7 million off the back of an underwhelming season, and if Everton sign James Rodriguez, his game time is likely to be severely limited. The same goes for Giovanni Lo Celso, who I actually like a lot, but he didn't score a single goal and only made 2 assists in the Premier League last season, so I think there are far better options at £7 million. Leeds United forwards Rodrigo and Patrick Bamford both have high ownership figures, presumably largely among Leeds fans, but FPL is a game which you have to strip away the emotion. Whilst Rodrigo is a talent who will improve Leeds, of that I've no doubt, he doesn't tend to score a great deal of goals, so there are a couple of cheaper forwards who I'd actually rather have than him. John Lundstrom's ownership of 13.6% seems bizarre and is presumably caused by people just looking at total point statistics from last season. Lundstrom was so good last season because he was a midfielder playing in defence for a team that kept plenty of clean sheets, and he scored a few to boot. Now he's a midfielder who most likely won't start all that many games and will be a points vacuum unless Sheffield United suffer a string of injuries in midfield. Lastly, I notice Alexander Mitrovich's ownership is enormous at over 27%, which is second only to Timo Werner in terms of forwards. I can understand that given the alternatives at £6 million, but I seem to remember him having very high ownership the season before last when he only actually scored 11 goals. That isn't bad in a relegated team, but I suspect there were better options out there 2 years ago, and there may well be this season as well, even if it means swapping him for someone like Ryan Brewster at £4.5 million and using those additional funds to strengthen your midfield. Right. There's a whole load more I could mention, like the unusual transfer window situation, which means teams will still be signing players who might take your interest in October, and also the slightly unusual risk of losing half your squad to them getting diagnosed with COVID mid-season, since we've seen a few players test positive in recent weeks as the build-up to the season begins. I'm aware this video is already likely very long though, and there's probably about 7 people left who are actually still watching it, so I'll wrap things up there. Thank you all as ever for watching, hit the like button if you enjoyed this video or felt any of the advice was of use, let me know your thoughts in the comments and make sure to subscribe to the channel. Oh, and don't forget to join the HITC Sevens FPL mini league should you wish to do so.